My husband's estate is worth $160 million, and this house will pass down to me. We don't have any kids, so everything will be mine." My sister-in-law spoke with an air of confidence, as if she was already planning her future. "My name is Zinnia, I'm 44 years old, and I work part-time. My husband and I have 2 sons, one in his senior year and the other a sophomore in high school. My oldest is preparing for his college entrance exams this year. He's always dreamed of becoming a lawyer and has been working really hard to make it happen. Ever since he was little, he's wanted to follow in the footsteps of my older brother, Brooks. My brother is a lawyer, and a few years ago, he started his own law firm, even hiring a few other lawyers to work for him. My son admired my brother's success from a young age and always loved to study, getting great grades all throughout school. When my brother found out about my son's dream of becoming a lawyer, he was thrilled and encouraged him. Every time they met, my son would say, "I'm going to be a lawyer just like you, Uncle." My brother would laugh and reply, "Well, hurry up and join me in the firm." Even though my brother didn't have any kids of his own, he loved playing with my sons whenever he visited. He would spoil them, too. My brother's wife was 10 years younger than him, and though I didn't know her well, she seemed like a bit of a difficult person. She rarely visited our home, and we never really spoke much. My brother and I lost our parents when we were young, so when I got married, my brother stepped in to act as a parent. He got married shortly after me, and we were happy to see him with someone. But when I first met his fiancée, I was surprised. She had such a sour expression on her face. We were expecting her to be smiling and excited, but instead, she seemed unhappy. In front of them, I told them they made a great couple, but once we got home, I shared my true thoughts with my husband. I was curious why she seemed so upset. My husband agreed with me, saying she didn't seem like a very cheerful bride. But what can we do? A little before their wedding, my brother bought a beautiful house. My husband and I took our kids to visit and celebrate. The house was stunning, just as I expected from my successful brother. He owned a law firm after all. But once again, my sister-in-law was nowhere to be seen. My husband, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "Has your wife already left you?" But my brother's face turned serious, and that made us both a little uncomfortable. My brother explained that whenever something came up, his wife would go back to her parents' house. That day was her mother's birthday, so she was staying with her family. My husband, realizing his joke had fallen flat, felt a bit awkward. Then, out of nowhere, my brother asked, "If I can't have kids of my own, would you let me adopt one of yours?" I thought he was joking at first, but the look on his face told me he was serious. I didn't know how to respond, but my husband, not thinking much of it, laughed and said, "We'll see what happens in the future. If it comes to that, we can talk about it. You're welcome to adopt one of them if it ever gets to that point." My husband didn't seem to take it seriously, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of adoption and the fact that my brother and his wife weren't getting along troubled me. It wasn't really my place to get involved, but I still worried. From that day on, whenever we visited my brother's house, or when he came to ours, it was always just him. His wife never showed up, and my brother didn't bring her up in conversation, so I stopped asking about her. They had been married for over 10 years by now, and honestly, I had almost forgotten she existed. This year, my oldest son got accepted into his dream law school, which was a big moment for all of us. My brother came over to celebrate and brought up adoption again. "Like I mentioned before, would you be willing to let me adopt one of your sons?" he asked, this time with a more serious tone. He and his wife had never been able to have children, and now, it seemed like they had decided they wouldn't. When we first discussed it, it was more of a casual conversation, but this time, it felt different. Still, my husband didn't take it too seriously. He jokingly replied, "Would you like to adopt our eldest since he wants to be a lawyer like you?" My husband said it so easily, like it was no big deal, but I could tell my brother was really considering it. I felt uneasy about the adoption because it's such a huge decision that would change my sons' lives. Even though they would be with my brother, their uncle, I worried about my sister-in-law. What if she didn't treat my sons well, since they wouldn't be her biological children? So, I asked my brother, "Is your wife okay with this idea of adoption?" He gave me a faint smile and said, "Don't worry about her. We've already talked it over. Hearing that brought me some relief, but I still couldn't decide immediately. I knew I needed to discuss it with my two sons first. They were in high school now, so it was important to let them make the choice themselves. We didn't talk about it any further that day. But just a few days later, I got a call from my brother's law office. They told me he had collapsed. I rushed to the hospital, where some of his staff from the firm were already waiting, looking very worried. My brother had suffered a stroke while at work and was now unconscious. After I arrived, his staff left, mentioning that they hadn't been able to reach my sister-in-law. I tried calling their home number, but there was no answer, and I didn't have her cell number. My husband and my younger son arrived at the hospital a bit later, but still, there was no word from my sister-in-law. Eventually, my younger son found my brother's smartphone among his things. We unlocked it and searched for her number. When I called from his phone, she answered angrily, shouting, "I told you not to call me again. I'll sue you." I interrupted her, trying to explain, "It's Zinnia, Brooks's sister." My brother passed out and was brought to the hospital. Her tone changed immediately. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it was Brooks." "You said he collapsed?" she asked, sounding concerned now. I told her about my brother's condition and which hospital he was at, but her response shocked me. "I'm sorry, but I have other things to take care of right now. Let me know if anything changes." Then she hung up. I couldn't believe it. What could be more important than her own husband lying unconscious in the hospital? Since it was clear that my sister-in-law wasn't going to be of any help, we decided to take care of my brother ourselves. My eldest son, having just finished his college entrance exams, was at home most of the time. He kindly offered to visit the hospital every day in my place. Despite our hopes, my brother never woke up. He remained in a critical condition, and throughout this time, my sister-in-law never once visited or even called to ask about him. About a week after he was hospitalized, I decided to call her again. This time, she answered cheerfully, almost too quickly. "What's up? Did he die?" Her words hit me like a punch, but I tried to keep my composure. "No, he's still alive. Why don't you come visit him at the hospitals?" I asked calmly. She snapped back, her voice filled with irritation. "I'm not a doctor or a miracle worker. What good would it do for me to go?" Her attitude angered me deeply, and I ended the call without saying another word. It dawned on me then that maybe my brother had brought up adoption because he had given up on having children with his wife. I started to believe they weren't getting along at all. When they first got married, I had asked my brother how they met, and he said they met through a marriage agency. Now, I wondered if she had only married him for his money, knowing he was a successful lawyer. The thought made me furious. When I shared this with my husband, he said something that hurt even more. If Brooks dies in this situation, his wife will inherit everything since they don't have kids. His words made sense. My brother had come to celebrate my eldest son's achievement just before he collapsed, and that's when he had asked about adoption again. Maybe he was already thinking about his will and his estate. I wished I had made a decision then, but it was too late now. After my brother's visit that day, I casually brought up the adoption idea with my two sons. Surprisingly, my younger son was open to it. "I wouldn't mind being adopted by Uncle Brooks," he said. Unlike my eldest, my younger son didn't have clear goals yet, and I think he believed life would be easier if he lived with my brother. I expected my eldest, who idolized his uncle, to feel the same, but his response shocked me. "I don't want to be adopted. I'm the eldest son, so I'll take care of you and Dad." His words filled me with pride, but I couldn't ignore the fact that my eldest son, who dreamed of becoming a lawyer, was actually the more suitable choice to be adopted by my brother. Sadly, I couldn't move forward with the adoption, especially since my brother was unconscious. I didn't want his estate or money, but I also didn't want his wife to inherit everything. It seemed like she was just waiting for him to pass away. All I could do was hope for his recovery. Unfortunately, my brother didn't get better. A few days later, he passed away. I had no choice but to contact my sister-in-law. I called her and said, "My brother has passed away. Should we arrange the funerals?" Her response was as cold as ever. "It's all up to you. Just make sure I'm not the one carrying the coffin." She said it so cheerfully, as if she had been waiting for this moment. I don't want to deal with any formalities, my sister-in-law said coldly, and before I could respond, she quickly hung up the phone. In the end, my husband and I took charge of arranging the funeral. Luckily, the staff from my brother's law firm were incredibly helpful and assisted us in various ways. My husband was worried about the future of the firm, but my brother had planned ahead. Even though he was the main lawyer, he had delegated the management of the firm to someone he trusted, so the business would continue running smoothly. Many people attended my brother's funeral. There were so many flower wreaths that they couldn't all fit inside the hall. It was at that moment that I truly realized how remarkable my brother was. My sons also helped out at the funeral, and when my younger son saw the important people in attendance, presidents of major companies, politicians, and more, he became visibly upset. I knew I should have been adopted, he muttered. I didn't know Uncle was this amazing. Both my husband and I could understand his disappointment. My brother was a great man, and our son was just beginning to grasp how significant he was. During the service, I served as a pallbearer, but no one asked where my sister-in-law was or why she wasn't there. It was as if no one cared or even knew she existed. My brother and his wife never had a wedding ceremony, just a honeymoon. So many of our relatives might have been unaware that he was even married. Looking back, I almost wished they had never gotten married. What good is a wife who doesn't even attend her husband's funeral? I also regretted not agreeing to let my brother adopt my younger son sooner. Now, I feared his wife would inherit everything. With the help of the law firm staff, the funeral was finally over. To thank everyone for their support, I invited them to my brother's house for a meal. I said to the guests, "Because of all your help, my brother can rest in peace. We are so grateful." It was a sad moment for all of us. That's when my sister-in-law showed up, wearing a flashy pink coat. She walked in with a big smile on her face, as if she had planned to arrive just as everything was finishing. I couldn't help but ask, "Why are you here now, after all this time?" She ignored my question and instead spoke loudly for everyone to hear. My husband's $160 million estate, along with this house, will be passed down to me, his wife. We don't have any children, so everything belongs to me. There was something about the way she said it, so triumphantly, that made the law firm staff standing nearby start laughing. We all turned to look at them, confused as to why they found her statement funny. My sister-in-law glared at them and yelled, "What exactly are you laughing at? How rude!" One of the lawyers, still smirking, responded, "We all know that you and Brooks were officially divorced. We saw the results of the settlement the day before he collapsed." I was stunned. "Divorced?" I exclaimed, turning to look at my sister-in-law. Her face had gone pale as she stared at the lawyers, who had just revealed the truth. Another lawyer chimed in, "Yes, you were ordered to pay alimony because your affair led to the divorce. It's only fair." My sister-in-law, glaring at the lawyer, snapped, "I'm not going to pay any alimony. Who's left to pay?" She was trying to mock them, but she had no chance against a group of legal experts. The lawyer quickly responded, "The right to alimony will be inherited, so now you owe it to Zinnia, as she is the inheritor." That was the moment I realized for the first time that I was my brother's sole heir. Since our parents had passed away, and if the divorce was finalized, everything would come to me. My sister-in-law seemed to realize this too, and she looked at me with a horrified expression. I instinctively took a step back, feeling unsettled by her reaction. But despite this realization, she still wasn't ready to give up. She started shouting again, "Don't I get half of the estate now that the divorce is settled?" One of the lawyers, looking exasperated, answered her calmly, "Didn't Brooks give you a large sum of money when the divorce was finalized? We have the receipt. And by the way, the house was bought before your marriage, so it's not subject to division." I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction watching her be lectured by the lawyers. No matter what she said, they had the facts on their side. After a moment, she seemed to remember something and, with a slight smirk, said, "Well, there's still the life insurance." "I should still be the beneficiary," my sister-in-law declared, her confidence surprising me given that everyone around her seemed to be against her. She boldly claimed that she had changed the beneficiary of Brooks's life insurance to herself. But the lawyer quickly corrected her. Brooks was a careful man. I'm pretty sure he updated it when the divorce was finalized. I decided to check for myself. I searched through my brother's important papers and found the life insurance policy. My sister-in-law noticed and snatched it from me, her impatience clear as she scanned the document for her name. But when she realized the truth, her shoulders dropped in disappointment. She handed the policy back to me, and I saw what she had. I was listed as the beneficiary. Realizing her plan had completely fallen apart, my sister-in-law, in a fit of frustration, finally blurted out what she had been holding in. I married a lawyer because I thought he was rich. Now all I've got is a little bit of money, and on top of that, I have to pay alimony. This is all a huge mistake. One of the lawyers, with a grim look, responded calmly. Brooks said the same thing. He regretted ever seeking advice from that marriage counselor. He always felt he had made a big mistake. My brother had never mentioned this to me, but clearly, he had been more open with his coworkers. Left with no way to defend herself, my sister-in-law rolled her eyes and stormed out of the house. She would still be responsible for paying alimony, but the problem was she didn't have a job. She quickly started looking for work, but she wasn't serious about it and quit soon after. Desperate, she went back to the marriage counseling agency, this time looking for another wealthy man. She needed money fast and thought she could cheat someone out of it through marriage. She found a rich man and manipulated him, asking for financial support before they were even married. But the man quickly saw through her scheme and reported her to the police. She was arrested for marriage fraud. The news came from one of the lawyers at my brother's firm. He admitted that, to be honest, I had never received a penny of alimony from her. When I went to the lawyer to discuss it, he explained that now that she had been arrested, it would be even more difficult to collect any payments in the future. But alimony wasn't what I cared about. I was more interested in seeing her face the consequences of her actions. I believe my brother would have wanted her to be punished for what she had done. I hoped the police would thoroughly investigate all her other crimes and that she would be charged in court as a felon. After unexpectedly inheriting my brother's property, my family and I moved into the house he had left behind. My husband and sons were thrilled. It was a massive upgrade from the apartment we had been living in. My eldest son, inspired more than ever, threw himself into his law studies. Watching the lawyers from my brother's firm argue with my sister-in-law had only fueled his desire to become a lawyer. Although he was never adopted by my brother, I hoped he would carry on his uncle's legacy and become a brilliant lawyer, just like him. Only my second son seemed a bit bitter about how things had turned out. He half-jokingly said, "Honestly, I wish I had been adopted by uncle so I could have inherited everything." Despite his smile, there was a hint of disappointment behind his words.